Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This morning we're going to get right to business, our reading and discussion of the book Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley. Are you losing your civil liberties today? You find your government becoming tyrannical? This book will explain why. And yesterday we covered most of page 53. We'll continue where we left off yesterday. If you're following along in your own online copy of the book, page 53, we were talking about the Ecclesiastical Titles Act, a vain attempt of Parliament to prevent the papacy, a foreign potentate that was hostile to the Protestant government of England, to prevent the papacy from literally confiscating the land and the wealth of England through deathbed bequeaths to the Roman Catholic Church. It was a vain attempt. It was doomed to failure before it even started. The powerful lines within that legislation were redacted before it ever came for a vote. And nonetheless, even though it was passed, it was not enforced. Now, the suggestion I have this morning is, if there ever is a serious attempt to put down the Vatican's control over our government, it will be met by harmless legislation. Okay? So it's going to be up to the people of the United States to take matters into their own hands. Our government is being overthrown in this country just like it was overthrown in Great Britain at the time of the writing of this book in 1865. It's being overthrown by the same power, by the same means, by the same methods, and the end of it will be the same. However, our liberties stand in the balance, and more than that, much more than that, the rightful throne of Jesus Christ himself lies in the balance. And we are being measured as to what side we stand on this issue. Now, back to page 53, talking once more about this Ecclesiastical Titles Act. He says the act was utterly powerless to prevent the erection of the Roman Catholic hierarchy or to hinder the synodical action that was meant to follow. The cardinal was sent by the Pope to come to England to read his bull to establish the Roman Catholic hierarchy in Protestant England, to divide up the land into dioceses, to appoint over each diocese a bishop, and then once they were constituted, to get together in a synod of bishops and to begin the planning of how they were going to govern the country. Against the Queen. Never mind that England already had its own government. They were literally going to set up a parallel government and take over England. He says the government believed, at least they maintained, that the synodical action would be impossible under the bill. But obviously and undeniably, there was nothing to prevent. Cardinal Wiseman changing of into an at. In other words, the bishop of Birmingham to the bishop at Birmingham, which would have been a loophole in the law, and Roman Catholics could still bequeath their land to the Pope through these bishops. All right. He says, and obviously and undeniably, there was nothing to prevent Dr. Wiseman from changing of into an at and assembling his suffragans, that is the bishops, in synod the very next day. The bill did not deal with the cardinalate. In other words, it did not deal with the office of the cardinal. Okay? He says the first, the most offensive, and the most easily disposed of part of the affair. Okay? It was Cardinal Wiseman, or Dr. Wiseman as a cardinal, that was sent to the United States. or rather sent to Great Britain, excuse me, to read the papal bull and to establish the Roman Catholic hierarchy. Now, here's something you need to understand. A cardinal is regarded in the Roman Catholic Church as part of the Roman Catholic hierarchy to the status of a prince, that is, the son of the Pope. Remember, we talked about Prince Titus that destroyed the temple in Israel in 70 A.D. He was the son of the reigning Caesar at the time, Vespasian. This is how the papacy views the cardinalate, the College of Cardinals. They are the sons of the church. They are the sons of the Pope, and they carry the Pope's authority wherever they go. Such is the view of the papacy toward the cardinalate, and such is the view of the cardinalate toward the papacy. They are the sons of the papacy. Now, if the son of the so-called prophet Muhammad were to come to this country and begin to set up a hierarchy to govern the country, we would be in an uproar, wouldn't we? Well, the like has been done in England in 1865. The son of the self-styled King of Kings and Lord of Lords has set up the Roman Catholic hierarchy in Protestant Great Britain. The government of Great Britain is under a military attack. Okay, we need to understand what's really happening here. He says the bill, that is, the Ecclesiastical Titles Act, did not deal with the cardinalate. The first, the most offensive, and the most easily disposed of part of the affair. A prince of another state, that's what a cardinal is, the son of a foreign potentate, a son of the king of a hostile nation, the papacy, the Vatican. He was permitted to reside and to exercise dominion in the name of a foreign potentate, that is the Pope, and I will add the word hostile. He's a very, very hostile foreign potentate to Protestant Great Britain. Their purpose is to overthrow the legitimate government, the Protestant government of Great Britain. So that makes him hostile, and he's a foreign potentate. In other words, he's the king of Vatican City, which is a nation, just like all other nations. It has national identity. It has a national government headed up by the Pope, and the Cardinal Wiseman, is simply the prince of that Pope who has come to England to set up a foreign government within the land. Okay, I hope I'm getting this across to my listeners, what a cardinal really is. He says, a prince of another state, he was permitted to reside and to exercise dominion, that is, control and authority, in the name of a foreign potentate in the Queen's dominions. The papal machinery imported with the cardinal, or to be imported in years to come into the country, could be worked out without check or challenge. Okay? This is what Rome intended, that this government could be erected through his prince, Dr. Cardinal Wiseman, and that the legitimate government of England would be helpless to challenge it or to check it. Now he says, what then had the country gained by the bill of the government, the Ecclesiastical Titles Act? It had gained this and only this, that as soon as the measure should have become law, Dr. Cardinal Wiseman, would be obliged to subscribe himself Archbishop at Westminster instead of Archbishop of Westminster. Practically, the country has not gained even this small advantage, for slight as was the change required to satisfy the law, Dr. Cardinal Wiseman did not put himself to the trouble of making it. He has gone on from that day to this, subscribing himself as Archbishop of Westminster, and his suffragans, the bishops under him, have followed this worthy example, just as if no Ecclesiastical Titles Act were in existence. In other words, they completely ignored the law, even as worthless as the law was. Okay, now we can expect this from the cardinal or the prince of Satan in the Vatican. All right? We can expect this of a Roman Catholic cardinal. His first and foremost authority is the papacy. He is first and foremost a citizen of Rome, though he lives in England. And he answers to the Pope and only to the Pope, just as we are to answer to Christ and only to Christ. And whatever attempt was made to emasculate the law before it was ever voted on, once it was voted on and put on the ordinance books, was completely ignored by this cardinal and his bishops. That is the assumed authority that the papacy has over all the civil governments. This has been demonstrated over and over and over again through history. The Roman Catholic Church answers to no one, and its law is supreme, and it is Roman Catholic canon law, and we're going to be specific about that as we continue our reading here. He says he has gone on from that day to this, subscribing himself Archbishop of Westminster, and his suffragans, the bishops under him, have followed his worthy example, just as if no Ecclesiastical Titles Act were in existence. We do not recollect a single attempt on the part of the government to put in force their own act. It was passed, put upon the statute book, and there the matter ended. Now, I want to speak again to my listeners. If there ever is, and I doubt there ever will be, but if there ever is an attempt by our government to legislate laws that tend to rein in or in any way limit the function of the cardinals and the archbishops and the bishops of this country, to ever stop American Roman Catholics from donating or bequeathing their land and their children's inheritance to the Roman Catholic Church, it will be emasculated before it ever reaches the floor. It will be passed, and if there's anything left of it to pass, it will languish on the record books and never be enforced. Okay? Our government has become papal, and though it may take a public stand, at least temporarily, of being opposed to foreign intervention, such as we see with the papacy, if it ever takes an opportunity to act, it will be just to put the American, it will just be a public display for public consumption. It will have no substance, and even if it does, it will be ignored by the Roman Catholic hierarchy in this country. That much we can expect. Now he said, continuing here, had the papal aggression taken place in the times of the Commonwealth, this is a period of time in British history where their form of government was considered a commonwealth, and it's generally linked with the rule and reign of Oliver Cromwell. Okay, he was Protestant, and it says, had the papal aggression taken place in the time of the Commonwealth, an occurrence which it is not easy to conceive as of happening while the Lord Oliver was in Whitehall, that is Oliver Cromwell, Cromwell would not have so dallied with it. In other words, Cromwell Oliver Cromwell would never have even toyed with this Cardinal Dr. Wiseman. Okay? He would have dealt with matters swiftly and decisively against the Cardinal and against the Pope. And here's how he'd have done it. Listen to what he says. The Cardinal would never have been permitted to see his brave see of Westminster. His red hat, if not hung up at his point of debarkation from the boat when he arrived in England, and I will suggest that even not only would his cardinal's hat, but his head right along with it, would have hung at the very point of his debarkation on the shores of England, as a terror to all similar invaders of the nation's independence in time to come, would have within 2 hours, before 2 hours would have elapsed, have been hurried across the channel. Okay? Cardinal Dr. Wiseman would have had one of two chances under Oliver Cromwell. He would have either had his cardinal's hat and his head removed and put on a stake on the shores of Great Britain, warning the Pope and any other cardinal, one of his sons, to come to this country. Either that, or he would have been hurried swiftly back across the channel to save his life. Okay? Now, I'm not advocating violence here, but Cromwell would never have dallied or toyed with this pretended usurpation of the legitimate government of Great Britain by the Pope or anyone else, okay? And he would have taken matters into his own hands, and he would have used whatever force was necessary to repel the invasion. He says the cardinal's red hat, if not hung up at his point of debarkation, as a terror to all similar invaders of the nation's independence in time to come, would, before 2 hours had elapsed, have been hurried across the channel. Admiral Blake would have been, that is the admiral, the head of the British Army, or rather the British Navy. Admiral Blake would have been underway for Civita Vecchia. Civita Vecchia is a main port just west of Rome. Okay, it's a military port. At least in these days, the Admiral of the British Navy, Admiral Blake, would have been underway for Civita Vecchia. A battalion of Ironsides, that is British ships, would have demanded explanations in the Vatican, and if they found them unsatisfactory, they would, to a certainty, have brought the Pope, not as Lord Campbell in a figure, but in actual fact, they would have brought the Pope in person back to Britain to answer in his own person, his own proper person, before Cromwell's Lord Chief Justice. Okay? If the same thing had happened under Oliver Cromwell, there would have been a fleet of British ships after they decapitated the Cardinal or chased him back across the channel. There would have been a fleet of British ships docked at Civita Vecchia. They would have gone to the Vatican 50 miles away, loaded up the Pope and his throne, put him on the British ships, hauled his diabolical butt back to Britain to serve trial. Now, do you think the American government would ever do such a thing? Let me tell you, let me suggest something to you. That's exactly what it would take to oust the Jesuits' influence in Washington, D.C., the Vatican's influence in this country. That's what it would take, an all-out military encroachment upon the very throne of the Pope in Rome. Do you think we're ever going to get that from our government? You see, they went to no limit to unthrone Saddam Hussein for crimes he didn't commit, for crimes that our government admitted he didn't commit. They sent armies twice to Iraq. But do you think they'd ever lift a finger against a truly hostile foreign potentate? Hostile to this government? Hostile to our Constitution? Hostile to our liberties? Hostile to our Christ? Our government would never think to do it. More rather, our government would spend all our wealth and engage all our militaries, naval, air force, marines, you name it, to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope. Not only have they given this country lock, stock, and barrel to the control of the papacy, but we are now the Pope's crusaders all over the world. Because of Vatican Council II. Because of futurism. Because futurism exonerated the papacy of the onus, the biblical, historical, and prophetic onus of Antichrist. And they now consider him the vicar of Christ, the replacement of the Son of God on earth, and they serve him as though he were God. And they encourage you? No, they enslave you to do the same at your expense. I want you to listen to this again. This is the way it would have been had Dr. Cardinal Wiseman attempted to set up a Roman Catholic hierarchy of cardinals and of archbishops and of bishops, and to divide our land into dioceses as they did. Here's exactly what would have happened under Oliver Cromwell. Had the papal aggression taken place in the times of the Commonwealth, an occurrence which it is not easy to conceive of as happening while the Lord Oliver Cromwell was at Whitehall, Cromwell would have not so dallied with it. The cardinal would never have been permitted to see his brave see of Westminster. His red hat, if not hung up at his point of debarkation as a terror to all similar invaders of the nation's independence in time to come, would before 2 hours had elapsed have been hurried back across the channel. Admiral Blake would have been underway for Civitavecchia. A battalion of British Ironsides would have demanded explanations in the Vatican, and if they found them unsatisfactory, they would to a certainty have brought the Pope, not as Lord Campbell in a figure, but in actual fact, in the flesh, to answer in his own proper person before Cromwell's Lord Chief Justice, and they might have brought away at the same time Peter's chair. That is the throne upon which the Pope sits, deeming it likely that there was no further use for it at Rome or anywhere else, and that its more appropriate location would be the British Museum alongside the Great Bull of Nineveh and other kindred curiosities. James A. Wiley is telling us that if the same aggression had taken place during the time of Oliver Cromwell, the papacy would have ceased to exist. The man of sin, the son of perdition, would have ceased to exist. And his throne and his crown, his mitre, and all of his artifacts would be put on world display at the British Museum. Would to God, in the United States of America, there were another Oliver Cromwell. Would to God that there was another man in our time, the likes and the spirit of Oliver Cromwell. But because there's not, this country is doomed for papal tyranny, and we're seeing it already. And yet the whole country fears more than anything else a phony Islamic invasion. We'll be right back after the message. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to keep this program on the air, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors it. Also, if you'd like to contact me, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. Now, I don't want my listeners to miss part of the significance of what the author James A. Wiley just told us before the break. The Pope and all of his artifacts, if Oliver Cromwell would have had anything to do with this, the artifacts of the papacy would have been found henceforward in the Museum of Britain, the British Museum. They would been put on public display, world display, as just one of the other curiosities of history. Just right alongside the Bull of Nineveh. Now, do you know what the Bull of Nineveh is? For those of you who don't, you can go to Wikipedia and see it for yourself. It's an ancient Babylonian and Syrian idol. It's an image that is carved out of stone in the fashion of a bull with a man's head on it, with a very, very curious and significant headdress that you will most likely instantly recognize. Now, it was uncovered near the ancient city of Nineveh. It was one of the idols worshipped there, and it's a caricature that represents the ancient king Nimrod. Okay? Nimrod, the one who built the Tower of Babel. And I find it very interesting, if not telling, that James A. Wiley would have suggested that Oliver Cromwell would have placed the papal throne right there alongside the Bull of Nineveh in the British Museum. You see, there's more significance to what James A. Wiley is saying than is readily understood by those who read his work. What James A. Wiley is suggesting is that the modern papacy is the very emanation of the ancient King Nimrod. And that the Bull of Nineveh, which is a caricature of Nimrod, would be placed side by side with the papal throne. They're one and the same. And if you've heard me once, you've heard me 100 times refer to the papacy as the modern day Nimrod, the Babylonian king. Because they are one and the same. Same stuff, different millennia. The papacy represents the modern emanation of the Babylonian king Nimrod, which enslaved the world and caused them to worship images and idols and men, and to build a tower to reach unto heaven in abject rebellion against the Creator. That's exactly what the papacy does. He is literally sitting in the chair of Nimrod. And James A. Wiley knows this. Though he did not make it specific, he made it in a way that cannot be misunderstood for those who understand what the papacy really represents. And he's also suggesting that Oliver Cromwell knew this too. And we can know it. If we abandon the belief in futurism and return to Protestant historicism, because it was the historicist interpretation of Bible prophecy, the only interpretation of Bible prophecy that can link the papacy back to Babylon, can link the Antichrist back to Babylon. So as long as we in this country stubbornly hang on to the lies that we've been taught in the churches for the last at least 3 generations, it's going to be virtually impossible for us to return to a true Protestant understanding of history and prophecy. And nor will we admit to ourselves the papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist of the Bible, and that his throne belongs as a public spectacle right along with the other curiosities of history, including the Bull of Nineveh. The belief in futurism that the Antichrist is a single individual and doesn't arrive on the world scene until just a few years before Christ's return, you can argue till the cows come home, whether it's 7 years or 3.5 years, you're both wrong. As long as we hold to that belief, that lie, we'll never understand either the Bible or history. And neither will there be a serious uprising in this country against the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist of the Bible, that has long since controlled our government through the cardinals, the bishops, the archbishops, and the priests of the Roman Catholic Church, and the shadow government called the diocesan structure, the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, which oversees our visible government. It's absolutely essential that we abandon lock, stock, and barrel futurism and then find out the truth, the historical understanding of the prophecies. The Protestant reformers were correct. We are wrong, dead wrong. And because we are wrong today, we don't even recognize who the enemy is and that he has already taken us prisoner. And we sit here wringing our hands uselessly over a proposed Islamic invasion when the country is already possessed by the Pope. And this supposed Islamic invasion that has invaded Europe and is invading this country under Barack Obama is just taking your mind completely away from where it really belongs. And as real a threat as it may be, I'm not saying it's completely phony. They've instigated a war in the Middle East, and they've troubled the Middle East. The people are fleeing from that area, and where else would they go but Europe and America? They've literally caused this problem, but it accomplishes one strategic military objective, and that is to keep Protestants in America from understanding what's really going on. And it has succeeded marvelously. Okay, as long as you're worried about Islamofascism or the erection of Mohammedist or Islamic caliphates in this country, you're not going to be much worried about the Pope, are you? It's working. It works very well. It's working just as well for Europe as it is for America. Okay, it makes it all the more difficult for the truth to be understood. And that's the problem. Okay, now James A. Wiley continues, comparing the situation as it would have been under Oliver Cromwell, where the outcome would have been entirely different than what was taking place at the time of James A. Wiley. He says, we live in a different age. Still between what would certainly have been the decisive and summary proceeding of the statesmen of Queen Elizabeth or of Cromwell, and the abortive expedient of the British government in our day, there was room surely for a measure which, without trenching on conscience, would have vindicated the independence of the nation and shielded the Queen from the traffickings of the Pope and the Cardinal. Meanwhile, Wiseman, Dr. Cardinal Wiseman, stood firm. The realm of England appeared to rock to and fro beneath him. Still, he moved not. Nay, when the storm was at its loudest, he found courage to speak a few quiet but very daring words. He knew full well how unflinching the spirit and how unmovable the purpose of her who stood behind him. Who's the her that stood behind Dr. Cardinal Wiseman? She's described in your Bible in Revelation chapter 17, the scarlet harlot that rides the bloody beast, Revelation chapter 17. It's none other than the Roman Catholic Church, which depends upon the beast, the civil governments, to carry her to power. Okay? He knew well how unflinching the spirit and how unmovable her purpose, the purpose of her who stood behind him, the Roman Catholic Church. He had also taken the measure with tolerable accuracy of the sincerity and strength of those who brandished their weapons in front. He waited, therefore, until the storm should subside, that he might go on with his work. Thus did the trumpet summon the nation of Britain to a battle which, alas, never has been fought. The noise we made but deceived ourselves. It did not deceive Rome. So Rome went on with her construction. Protestant England didn't respond to the trumpet call. Is that just a sign of what's going to happen in the United States of America? Many who are listening would say, Tom, you know, it's already happened. Maybe I'm a diehard. Maybe I'm delusional. But I still have hope in Christ and his people. Let me say something to my listeners. Do you know God's power is most accurately demonstrated, most vividly displayed, most gloriously consummated when his people are the weakest? What a wonderful opportunity for God to exalt his name. At the very time when his people seem to have lost hope, when they seemingly have no power in this world to make his name great in the whole world. I can't think of a better time than now. That's my hope. That's what keeps me coming to the microphone every morning. I want it to be your hope too. Now, what was it that Rome was trying to build in England? Through what means was Rome trying to establish Roman Catholicism over Protestant Great Britain? That's the message of the next portion of the chapter. It's entitled, The Empire Within the Empire. James A. Wiley says, when the earthquake had subsided and the ground which had heaved like the ocean in a storm while the shock lasted was again still, the cardinal proceeded with his edifice. The severe but short-lived hurricane had taught him a lesson, which he was wise not to disregard. He occupied himself heart and hand to his work. But if he labored as energetically as ever, he said less about it than before. He no longer proclaimed what he was doing from the housetops. The building prospered nonetheless that it proceeded in silence. The materials of which the new Roman edifice in Great Britain was to be constructed were already all-fashioned. The great stones with which this second pantheon was to be reared, and it was to be reared because the previous one had been thrown down by the Protestant Reformation, had been blocked and chiseled by the cunning artificers of other days. They lay ready to the cardinal's hand in the great quarries of the pontifical theology and casuistry. And all that wise men had to do was to send and fetch them, and pile them one upon the other according to the instructions of that end framed by the great builders of this and of former ages. There was no need to alarm anyone by a noise of axes and hammers. Like a temple of a very different sort erected in earlier times, and this is a reference to Solomon's temple. Remember, Solomon's temple was erected in silence. All the hewing of stone, all the hewing of wood was to take place off-site. And then all of the materials for the temple were delivered in silence and erected in silence. There was no sound of construction, according to legend. Now, like a temple of a different sort erected in early days, the cardinal's building rose in silence. We pray our readers to lend us their understanding while we try to describe to them the fashion of the house, the heights of its walls, its length and its breadth, its going in and its coming, its going out and its coming in. The real object and aim of the papal aggression plainly, as briefly stated by Dr. Cardinal Wiseman, was to introduce canon law. Okay? This is the very substance of papal tyranny. Canon law. Now I'm going to talk some common sense to my listeners. If one on this earth declares himself a king, he must have a kingdom. Or he's not a king of anything. He's not a king. So what is a kingdom? First, it must have a king. Then it must have a kingdom, a jurisdiction, borders. Then it must have subjects. And after all, a king is not a king unless he has subjects to be the king over, right? And then he must have a law, a constitution. Lacking any one of those elements, it's not a kingdom. Lacking a king, it's not a kingdom. Lacking a jurisdiction or borders, it's not a kingdom. Lacking subjects, it's not a kingdom. And lacking a law, it's not a kingdom. So the Pope claimed himself king, claimed the cardinal his son, his prince, claimed the jurisdiction of all of England, claimed all of the people of England his subjects. Now, what's lacking? Law. And having rejected God's holy law, the Pope or the king has to have his own law, right? And he does. It's called canon law. And then you have a kingdom. Trouble is, the canon law is diametrically opposed to God's holy, immutable, eternal, and perfect law. It is anti-law. It is anti-God. It is anti-Christ. And that's the law that Cardinal Wiseman and his king in Rome, the Pope, would have applied over all of Great Britain. The real object and aim of the papal aggression, plainly, as briefly stated by Cardinal Wiseman, was to introduce canon law into Protestant Great Britain. It's an overthrow of the government. Now, the question we have to ask is not what the papacy intended to do for Great Britain, because we've just been told what the papacy tried to do in England. Establish Roman Catholic canon law. What do you suppose the papacy wants to do in the United States of America, or has already done, as many would assert, and as I would concede? Imposed upon us Roman Catholic canon law. Through the civil law. The Roman Catholic cardinals that are the head of the shadow government, the archbishops, the bishops, the priests underneath them in their jurisdictions, the dioceses of this country, together with all the Roman Catholic graduates of the Roman Catholic universities, the Jesuit universities of this country, who are seated in the highest offices in our government, concertedly and in cooperation with one another, write the laws of this land. And they enforce them through the Justice Department. And they have Roman Catholics on the Supreme Court that interpret our Constitution. For all intents and purposes, this country's Catholic, and Protestantism has been outlawed. Just as it was going to be outlawed in Great Britain if Great Britain didn't stand up and fight. Great Britain was alarmed. They were warned about the papal aggression. We've never been warned, or at least never taken the warning, heeded the warning. And no one objects if a Catholic is elected either on the library board in your community, or the city council, or the state legislature, or the county, or even Washington, D.C. We hold Roman Catholics to be equal citizens, when in first and foremost they are citizens of Rome and subject of the Roman Pontiff. Now, naturally, anybody with a brain with more than 2 neurons to rub together can say, hey, this might be a threat to our government. These people aren't loyal to our country or to our legal system or to our Constitution. They're first and foremost subjects of the Pope. And he's demonstrated over and over and over throughout history to be the arch enemy of Christ and the arch enemy of Christ's faith, Protestantism. Now, if, as most of us understand, or some of us rather, understand that the liberties that we prize in this country, the liberties that we seemingly fight and die to defend, are embodied in our Constitution, that if the Pope had his way, those civil liberties would be destroyed. We would come under canon law, and under canon law, the man has no civil liberties unless they are granted to him arbitrarily and never permanently by the papacy. You see, let me give you one example that would just instantly be recognized. During the dark days when the papacy ruled all the kings of the earth, and heretics were burned at the stake, Bible-believing Christians were burned at the stake for their belief and for even reading the Bible. They had no rights. In other words, if the state, the government that served the papacy, determined that you were a heretic, in other words, you read and believed the Bible, then you were secreted out of your house at 3 a.m. in the morning and taken to a place of imprisonment. You were never charged. No warrant was ever served for your arrest. No accusations or charges were ever leveled. You were simply called a heretic and commanded to repent or to abdicate. And you just literally weren't even, you were denied any legal representation. I mean, it was barbaric. Now, do you know that because of that abuse of power, laws have come about in Protestant countries guaranteeing the right of a man over his own body, called posse comitatus. You can't be taken unless some legitimate charge has been leveled against you, unless you've been read your rights, your Miranda rights, unless you've been appointed a representative in the court, legal representation. All of those rights came because of the abuses of the papacy during the Dark Ages. Now, when a president of the United States stands before the world and abdicates all of those protections, posse comitatus, and all of it, you might assume that he's returning to those days of old. And that's exactly what's happening. The New World Order is the Old World Order restored, and the papacy is the head of it. Canon law, we'll talk about it more next time when we get together on Inquisition Update. Blessing in the name of the one who caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease 2,000 years ago. Don't look for a future fulfillment. You have been deceived. We'll be back next time.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.